Coming up on this episode of the Real Estate Revolution.
What's your first recommendation? Is it like, okay, let's go the second home route or retreat center route? Or is it more like, let's get some of these, I love the like Cracker Jack box, like non-sexy, just like making money in the background type rentals. Like, if we're talking about overall wealth legacy building for our family, what's kind of the best starting point? Is it dream big and go big, or is it like start with these little ones first and kind of build up your portfolio?
This episode is so full of great questions and great strategies. You are not going to want to miss this. Make sure you listen till the end. Welcome back. We have some great friends, new friends of mine that recently acquired through Mastermind, because that's what happens. Mark and Nicole Pasternack, and they are Mark is in commercial videography, and Nicole has been doing wedding photography for the last couple of years. And now they're a married couple that has 4 kids, by the way. And they're not just recently married, but they're married. They've got 4 kids, and now they're helping other entrepreneurs with their business. And we had some great conversations at our recent mastermind meetup. So they are here because they're in the entrepreneur space and they're wanting to start the process of, where do we start to invest in real estate? We're making good money. There's certain things. We have 4 kids. So I'm going to let them fire away on the questions, and we're going to develop a plan by the end of this, and they're going to see what's possible. Thanks, guys, for coming on.
Yes, thank you for having us. We are so excited. I think like when we initially met you through the mastermind, I approached you right away, Steve, because I was like, tell me everything you know. Like, I think for the past 10 years we've been married, we're like, we should get into real estate. And then we're like, it kind of stops there because we don't know where to go next.
And there's like very few resources out there to tell you like the beginning part of it, right? It's like you hear all these, oh yeah, man, now we have 10 homes or 15 homes and we've got financial freedom, and they make it all sound very easy, but we've never owned a rental property before. So we have no insight into how do we manage this? How do we even go about financing this? How do we what are the first 3 steps?
Where do we start?
Where do we start? We've bought and sold homes before that we've lived in, but we've never really bought an investment property.
Yeah. So like initial, what are the first steps? What would you say to people who are interested in real estate but don't know what to do next?
Yeah. It's like, we've got some extra capital, but it's like, how much do we need? What's our first thing that we should look for?
So the first step is obviously in finding that person or the masterclass or something that's going to start getting your mind wrapped around the real estate side of things, right? It's what I do on my podcast, on my YouTube channel, Instagram, is just kind of that flow of getting into the mindset of why is real estate important and what are the benefits of it? And that's where a lot of people get a little bit confused. Is they're like, yeah, I want to have passive income, right now, but I don't have any money. And I'm like, well, it doesn't quite work that way, right? The investment in real estate, like where you guys are at, because you have 4 kids, it's the long-term, unsexy investment, right? You're like, okay, we own a house, somebody lives there, they pay the mortgage, and we don't make any money on this investment. It just sits and does its thing, right? And so for entrepreneurs, what I want them to understand, like couples that are in your position, is, hey, where do we want to be in 10, 20, 30 years down the road? We have 4 kids. What is the legacy we want to build? And start getting you to dream about what's at that point rather than what's right in front of you. Because if we can reverse engineer where you want to be, and then we start backwards and we start going, okay, it's going to take X amount of houses, and we need to buy 1 house every year to do X, right? So now we understand, like, this is where we want to be. So if I said, Mark and Nicole want to create $20,000 a month in passive income from real estate. Well, if we have 10 homes that rent for $2,500 a month and they're free and clear, that's going to produce $25,000 a month in passive income minus expenses to get to where you want to be. Right? So now we have to reverse engineer the price, the strategy to get to that point, because it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a long, like I said, long, unsexy process of we're buying investment properties, but here's the goal and here's the strategy. Because what I see a lot of people in the entrepreneur space do is they start making more money and they either start to increase lifestyle, but they rarely are like, hey, where can I put some money that's going to create assets, that is also going to create tax benefits, that's also potentially, like in your case, going to create potential college funds or education funds for our kids. That's where I like you to be. So that's really the starting, is like knowing what you want, and also knowing where do we think we want to invest. So you guys are in Colorado, right? So have you even looked, again, this is where people need to start. Have you even looked at what things rent for in that area? And then if you look on Zillow, hey, this house rents for $2,500 a month, but then looking at Zillow going, well, how much is the $2,500 a month rental? Is it a $900,000 house? Well, with mortgages, does that make sense, right? So we start knowing our numbers and what it looks like. But there's also people that are in your position that maybe, hey, where we live is not the smartest place to invest in real estate because the prices don't equal. So we need to look outside that scope, and where do we go that it's going to make the most sense, right? So a lot of people in the mastermind group that we're in, and other people choose to invest here with me because I'm boots on the ground and we have all the pieces in one place for it, right? So it really just depends in that first rental. And you guys are a little bit ahead because obviously you have 4 kids. You're not going to do the typical house hack thing.
No,
right?
probably not. We're probably not at the house hacking stage.
Right. You're not going to want to pack your kids up every year and move them,
No.
right? So here's where your starting point is. Where do we get to the first property, right? So here's the things that have to be in line. So if you look at your primary residence, it probably has a good mortgage on it, probably has a good interest rate. We don't want to cash out refinance on it. It probably has some equity in it. Well, in your primary home, that equity line can usually be 80 to 85% of the value of the property minus what you owe on it. So let's say, you had $1 million house and you owed $500,000 on it. Now you have a $300,000 line of credit. Okay. This is a place where we talk about moving equity because we can potentially use that as a down payment for another house. Yes, you are paying for the equity line and there's a cost there, right? We get a little bit complicated in the financial side of things, but it's a way to move debt equity that's sitting in the house doing nothing to something else that's going to do something.
That's a great starting point. I never even thought about it that way.
Right.
Okay.
So most people, go ahead.
I was going to say, so let's can we give you real numbers and kind of play the scenario?
Yeah, please. Please. I always try to protect people's privacy as to what they want to talk about.
We're pretty open.
Yeah.
It's all on the county auditor website, right?
Exactly. So we bought this home almost a year ago, and we bought it for $875,000. We put about 25% down, and I believe the total loan was like $664, and I think we paid off 20 to 40 grand, somewhere roughly within there. So let's just say we've got $600,000 in our mortgage, and it's probably the value is probably right around still $875.
Well, if you didn't know, I've released my first book and published. It is available on Amazon, Limitless Real Estate Strategies. I wrote this for anybody in the real estate business. I don't care if you're a real estate agent, lender, wholesaler, investor. This will help you change and break some myths that you think are out there. It will also change your life, change your legacy, and ultimately help you build wealth while creating win-win strategies. So pick it up on Amazon today.
So I guessed pretty close without knowing.
I know.
So, we take that 600 to 900 aspect and you would go to maybe a local bank. Credit unions aren't great. I try to find that local connection, and I don't know if your real estate agent up in that area that you used would have a connection for somebody that specializes in home equity lines of credit. Like in Phoenix, we use Bell Bank because they specialize it and they make it super simple. All my clients go there. In fact, Rich and Shelby just did theirs through our contact here.
Nice.
So in that aspect, they're going to want to see you leave 10 to 20% equity in it. So let's just say it's worth $9. So about $200,000 equity in it is what the bank is going to want to see. So you probably have $100,000 to $150,000 worth of equity that's untapped right now that you could tap. Now, equity lines are tricky because they are adjusting with interest rates. So as interest rates have risen, the equity line interest rate is like at 8 or 9% right now. But it's a mindset of things will change, and are we preparing ourselves for opportunity? And this is where we want to get into this whole idea of investing is, hey, I want to be prepared for the opportunity when it arises, not chasing the opportunity.
Yeah.
And this is the difference in real estate, right? Is that we have a certain goal we want to get to. There's certain things that we want to do. And I always tell, my investors and people I work with, like, we're not buying houses just to buy houses.
Yes.
We're buying them because they make sense and they fit inside the plan that we designed to get from point A to point B. So doing the home equity line now prepares you. I have this equity line to tap if the right thing comes along. So that's phase one. You also might have cash. You also might look at your business year and say, hey, based on what we've talked about for a rental property, I'm just going to pick a price. We've said we're good at buying a $300,000 to $400,000 house somewhere as a rental. We don't know exactly where, what makes the most sense. We can talk about that in a second. Now you have a price point saying, okay, if we buy a $400,000 house with $100,000 down, what is our mortgage payment going to be? And is rent going to cover it or get close to it, right?
And should that cover the home equity line of credit that we would take out from this current home?
It's probably not going to, but consider this is you're moving equity from one place to the next, right? We're not buying boats with the equity line. We're moving the equity from one place to the next. Now, if you've got cash, great, but it also works from a standpoint of, let's say you could buy an investment property right now and you tap that $100,000 line of credit, but you knew that part of our plan was we need to save $100,000 every year for the next down payment. Now you're just paying that equity line back faster, right? And so we're kind of speeding the process up. So it's kind of like taking a draw, putting it back, knowing that we do need to pay this off, but we can also, depending on where you're at, this is where some people tend to agree and disagree. So I'll ask you this question in a second, is that even if the rental property is negative a couple $100 a month, not that I'm a big proponent of negative cash flow, but there's different trade-offs and we're looking at time, right? Everybody's like, I want cash flow. Well, that's great when interest rates were 2%. Cash flow is tougher now because they're at 7%. But am I buying a decent rental property or buying some equity that allows me to capture this opportunity to when I can refinance it, right? Can I negotiate a better price? Does it need more work? Those types of pieces on the investment, so that we're kind of building in a little bit of room. Yes, there's some negative in this for right now. And I like to ask this question. If I said, hey, this property you're going to buy has $50,000 in equity in it, but it's going to cost you $500 a month to hold it for a year, would you trade $6,000 for $50,000?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But you have to stomach that negative each month. You're like, for you guys, just adding a fifth kid, right?
I was going to say, I
is.
think we're always
Or,
like
a
in the
half a
negative
kid,
somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So the other thing too that I ask couples, like in your situation, right? We've got 4 kids, and so everybody wants passive, right? So what do you guys invest in, a 401k or an IRA right now?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. How much cash flow comes from that? None.
Question.
Right?
Right.
There's none, but we've been trained
to
to
try to keep it low so that it's not taxed. Yeah.
But we've been trained to put money into that as a means to saving for retirement, right? If we compare a 401k to real estate in the same amounts of money, the 401k is your money and you can borrow against it, but you're going to get taxed if you pull it out before retirement. But you're putting $300 to $400 to $500, $1,000 a month away, right?
Right.
It doesn't create any cash flow for years down the road. So why isn't it the same thought process in I can buy a $400,000 asset, which is like depositing $400,000 in your 401k, and I can put $100,000 or $80,000 down on it, 20%, and I control a $400,000 asset. That if I have to put $200 a month into that 401k, somebody else paid the other $300,000 off, and we haven't even talked about tax benefits, and we haven't talked about appreciation over time.
Yeah.
Right? So your 401k is money you have to put in. So if you wanted to buy $400,000 of stock, you got to buy it's got to be $400,000 cash. You want to buy a $400,000 house, it only costs you $80,000 to buy a $400,000 asset. And here's the difference. Your $400,000 cash you had to put over here, it's growing now at that, say 6-7% on the money you put in. Over here, if you put $80,000 in, you're getting the benefits of appreciation on a $400,000 asset, not an $80,000 asset. Okay.
And somebody else is paying for that, ideally.
Correct.
So
it go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask. So, when you're thinking about that, right? Like we bought our home on a traditional 30-year mortgage, right?
Yep.
When you go think about, especially in the climate that we're in, are you thinking of like, 5-year ARM, a 7-year, like what's the kind of the philosophy there on what type of mortgage you get?
Yeah. So when we're dealing with lower interest rates, like back when they were in the 3 to 4s, you'd be looking at a 30-year fixed.
Right.
Right now, you might be looking at ARMs or buying the loan down a little bit or the rate down, like on a 2-1 buy down, which is the payment starts out lower. And those both apply on the investor side of things. So yes, we're trying to keep that cash flow as much in line as we can, because we all can probably think that the rates are going to change sometime in the next 3 or 4 years, right? They're probably going to come down. They can't stay where they're at. I mean, they could, but let's all be hopeful that they come down, right? So it's kind of a temporary thing of, okay, we have a holding pattern, and that's where whatever we can do to keep the payment down for 2 or 3 years, as long as it's not something that, here's what I don't like about ARMs, and this is what happened in 2008. A lot of those adjustable rate mortgages hit, and the rates had gone up, and people couldn't refinance, right? So they couldn't even refinance without bringing a bunch of cash to the table. So you always have to look at like, what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
So in some cases, if it's not too far off, I'd say, hey, just do the 30-year fixed, pay the little bit of negative, and be prepared to refinance it when it comes time.
Right. That makes sense.
Right. But all that's going to depend on lender, what you're putting down. There's so many variables to the financing side of things that it's when we find that plan that, hey, yes, we want to buy an investment property. Yes, we've been qualified. Yes, we have our down payment. Now we're on the hunt for the next opportunity. And the way I work with my clients is, okay, we've gotten you prepared. When I call you, the only answer is yes, right? Because I found something for you and we need to move on it because we're picking up some sort of deal from that aspect. So that is one way that we look at it.
Okay, so sorry.
Go ahead, you can go.
In. So, I know that we could go out, go find our local realtor and, probably go find a property and buy it and then try to figure out how the heck to manage this thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or is there a better way to be working with somebody who is experienced in this and kind of create a partnership?
Yeah. So partnership, I would not do from the standpoint, right? What you want to own, you want to own. You can do partnerships with people in different aspects, but when we're talking about building for your family, like you want to do it on your own. Yeah. There's different ways to partner with people, like on money that they don't have ownership. And that's a whole nother bag of squirrels. But in your starting point, it's like, what are we building and what do we want to own? And, the place to start, it goes back to mindset, right? We're having this conversation here because what's going to happen is you're going to call your real estate agent and you go, hey, we want to find a rental property. And the first question you should ask that real estate agent is, if I want to buy a rental property, how many rental properties do you own? And the reason I say that it's really important, if the real estate agent doesn't own investment properties, they're going to have a hard time guiding you in the numbers and the aspects.
Right.
That's one of the reasons that makes me so good at what I do here, is because the amount of properties that I own, the amount of investors that I've worked with, and understanding the financial background in investing, right? So it's not a knock at my industry. It's one of my goals and my passions is teaching agents to understand this part of the business, because there's so many people that want to invest. And the worst part is somebody like you will go to your agent and they were great when they sold you the house. Everything was great. You're like, hey, we've got $500,000. We want to buy a rental property. What do you think? You put it back on them to say, what do you think? Because you don't have the knowledge of what you want to invest on, and you're relying on that person's expertise in traditional real estate to guide you to a rental property. And here's what typically is going to happen. Oh, if you're going to buy a rental property, we might want to buy something newer. We might want to buy something bigger because it's $500,000, right? So we can buy a bigger house, which is going to get more rent. And that's so far from the truth.
Right.
So when somebody comes to me and says, I've got $500,000 to invest, I'm like, how many rental properties do you want to buy? They're like, well, just one. I'm like, well, what if we took that $500,000 and we bought 5 properties that you can depreciate, that are going to appreciate, that you're going to have tax advantages on? Here's how we leverage that, right? So I can help them split it up and kind of tackle what they're trying to accomplish. The other piece is understanding your buy box. Okay. This is something that is so important. The buy box is critical which is knowing if you guys are going to invest in Colorado, you would want to know, like, what is the ideal rental property in Colorado, right? Wherever you're at. Is it a larger home? Is VRBO more ideal? What about long-term? And then you start looking at long-term liabilities. And what I talked about with the larger home is here's what happens in Phoenix. And I see this all the time through the property management company. Somebody gets hooked up with an agent. They got $500,000 cash and they take them to an outskirt town like Surprise, Buckeye, and like, you can buy a 4,000 square foot house. It's going to be a great rental. It's got 7 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, 12 AC units, and a pool. And I look at that and go, oh my God, do you know what you just did? And here's why. Whenever we buy a rental property, we want to do everything we can to reduce our long-term liabilities.
Yeah.
Okay, what are our long-term liabilities? Multiple AC and heating units, right? Because on a single unit, you just got to replace it once. If it's broken, it's broken. You got to fix that. When you have 2, you've got double the problems. You got 3, you got triple the problems, right? Then you start looking at, well, do I want to be in a homeowner association, right? What is the return on the homeowner association? It's not that it's bad, but I don't like super high homeowner associations. And homeowner associations are one more level of tattletaling on tenants, right? So you're getting notices from the management company or the HOA to the management company the tenant. You're like, and for me, I don't care if you park in the rocks. That's why I don't own things in HOA. Like, just take care of the house. I don't care, right? So it doesn't make any difference. Then you start looking at something that is really important, which is what is the location where the tenants might stay the longest. So for us, we looked at certain areas based on data from the property management company. You're like, well, if you look inside the loop, which is going to be the Loop 101, they're going to be smaller, older homes. They're going to be close to schools, bus lines, the working class, right? And their kids are going to settle in school and they're not going to want to move. So our average tenant is about 5 to 7 years right now. Why does that make a difference? Because if a tenant turns every year, that's repairs, it's a new leasing fee, it's expense that we don't think about. So I'm really big with the management company, like, hey, I want my tenants to be here like 5 years. I only want to pay you 6 times to lease this house over 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay, you brought up a word a lot of time called management companies, right? We haven't really talked about that. So we buy a home and it's like, that's one of our main questions.
Yeah,
like,
I think like with
do
4
we manage
kids, we're
it?
like,
Sure.
we don't have extra time to be
Yeah.
managing a second house. We barely have time to manage our first house.
So it's like, how do we
what does
find
that look like?
Yep.
So typically it's, like in your area, if you guys are going to invest up there, I would help you locate an agent that kind of has some sort of investment mindset. And then also most real estate agents will have some sort of property management company that they can refer you to, like we do here. My mom owns the management company and makes it simple, but I never recommend people try to do self-management. It's just not worth it at the end of the day. And here's why is that most states are very tenant friendly versus landlord friendly. And if you violate the rules, it can cost you a lot of money.
Right.
And so I prefer to have a property manager, and most management companies will charge you between, anywhere between 5 and 10% of the monthly lease, right? So you might be $150 to $200 a month, depending on the price range, to manage the property. And what that does is that all the tenant calls go into them. They dispatch repairs. They're going to make sure that the money's being collected. If people are late, they're collecting late fees. They're taking all of that stuff out of you, for a couple $100 a month.
Yeah.
And it's, the correlation to that is, it always cracks me up. People will go to a financial advisor and they will pay them 2% of whatever money they put in. So let's say $100,000, they're paying $2,000 a year for them to manage that $100,000. But people gripe about paying $2,000 annually to manage a house.
Yeah.
And it's like, unless you want to be the one that is your career, to manage homes or to manage investments, great. But it's like, we're not thinking about one home. We're thinking your
Multiple
scenario.
homes.
How in 10 years can we own 10 homes and be cash flowing?
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the goal, is like, how do we get here? And you do it because you guys are both busy with kids. The last thing you want is the tenant calls. So you're kind of paying for peace of mind.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's a cost. It's part of doing business. And keeping in mind that the goal for the management company is that They're there to help preserve your asset, but the asset is not only the house, it's the tenant,
Yeah.
right? So if the management company treats the tenants like people and not like tenants, I know a lot of management companies that like treat the tenants like dirt. The reality is the tenants are the most important part because they're the ones that pay the bills,
And they're the
right?
ones that
And
are taking care of the house day to day too.
correct. So a good management company will have good vetting of tenants and they will be able to guide you through those processes. They're going to have good vendors to utilize so you're not involved in repairs. So it's not worth trying to nickel and dime. I mean, even for me, we own a construction company that my wife runs, right? When there's properties that need minor repairs on things, they don't call my wife to make the repairs. They use their own vendors.
Right.
Because I don't want to get in the mix. We're trying to schedule coordinating. And if you've ever tried to schedule anything on a rental, you got to coordinate with the tenant, the vendor, when somebody I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah,
Right.
no, absolutely. I
And
mean, I'm actually shocked to hear that it's as low as you said it was. I think that's at least been one of my hesitations, like who's going to manage it and how much is it going to cost? I'm like, you're talking $2,000 a month, like $2,000 a year. That's
yeah.
nothing.
200 a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it more when you Airbnb or VRBO?
Yeah. So VRBO is a whole different animal. VRBOs, if you are going to take your hands off of it, which we've done, and let a higher end management company run it, they're going to take 20 to 25% of
Yeah.
gross lease, right? So when we did our one in South Scottsdale, I think we had a gross income of about 90 grand and they took about 30,
Okay.
right?
So are you thinking then, like with that in mind, like it's smarter to go for a long-term rental property, more like a house or an apartment or a condo versus doing something like Airbnb or VRBO?
There's two scenarios there. One where you guys are at, and I'm going to go through this in two different ways. One is, yes, you're thinking about, hey, we're going to buy some Cracker Jack boxes, right? These are going to be unsexy investments. They're going to do their thing. It's for the long term, right? The second piece, which is where I get into different strategies like I'm doing with another mastermind member right now, is the second home strategy, right?
Mhm.
So if you guys, where you live, you're like, hey, we would really like to buy a cabin an hour and a half from here. And it's a VRBO community. It's a ski community. It runs spring, summer, all those things. You can then go through and you can potentially buy a second home and then do exactly what we did, which is where we rented it every other weekend.
Mhm.
Right? So you get a chance to kind of utilize it. You clean it up when you leave. Then you rent it out. Some people have had really good success on like just doing friends and family on every other weekend. So the second home strategy into a VRBO is great because you get to experience it. And there's a lot of other financial benefits to it as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think, like, as we've talked about, kind of going back to your initial statement of like, it's about mindset, it's about the legacy you're leaving. Like, I think a big part of what we want to leave for our kids is not only the investment of these houses and what that can do for them and us financially, but definitely the experience level of it
Yes.
too, right? Like,
Yep.
how awesome would it be to have a property? Like, there's so many places an hour and a half, 2 hours from here that are gorgeous. Or how great would it be to have a property in Scottsdale that we
Yeah.
go spring break to every year? And
Right.
especially once again, like thinking about the financial benefits, like maybe not immediately and maybe not cash flow wise, but like instead of us having to pay for a residence for vacation, we have places that we can go to that we already own and that hopefully
Sure.
are cash flow positive.
So I love that you brought that up because I think it is a misconception where I hear people like, yeah, I want to buy something in Scottsdale so I can use it when we vacation. That's not a great start because the reality is you can book out, when you're going to use it. But if like you guys are flying down here with 4 kids, right, you're definitely going to be planning ahead. And
Always.
you might block something off in the calendar and then go, oh crap, we're not going to be there. And now it's not rented versus
Right.
if it's not being used, we will use it. But if not, we're not going to block off income producing dates when that same amount of income can go rent us something that will work just fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, with the second home is a little different when you talk about like going up north or whatever it is, because you are utilizing it on a regular basis. So
Right.
your stuff is in the garage. Your stuff might be in an owner's closet. You're living in the house and let somebody else rent it on the other weekends, which is a whole different aspect than, hey, we're going to have a house down here that we can go and use. Yeah, you can, but don't buy it for that purpose that, hey, we're going to buy this so we
Right.
can use it. We're buying it as an investment. If it's free when we're around, we can use it.
Right. Right.
But the
Right.
second home is a different thing. And one of the things, you guys are in the entrepreneur space, which I tout a lot with people, is the financial ability of buying a second home. Second homes have zero tax write-off. You can't depreciate it. You can't write the interest off on it. It is 100% expense.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you buy it as a second home, you live in it part-time, you rent it out part-time. Now it's classified as a rental, which
Okay.
means you can depreciate the property. You also, because you guys are entrepreneurs, you have companies that, let's say you're going to go up there and entertain a client, or you're going to give a weekend to a client.
Yep.
Now your business is going to rent those off weekends from you personally.
Right.
So you're going to take income from the company, pay for the personal asset combined with some of the rental income, and it makes that second home a wash, but you're able to get money coming out of the business to pay for some of that asset personally. And that's how you kind of structure. And there's more complications to that structure, but it is
Yeah,
one of those
but
things as entrepreneurs that we did early on, and it worked really, really well. And it's a great wealth building strategy. And then when you think about the second home, like for us, we go up to Munns Park all the time. That's where we always go. So it's permanent. Once we got done feeling out that house, we turned it into a permanent VRBO and we bought another one. Right. And now that VRBO covers the cost of this one. So there's a number of different moving parts on the VRBO side. But if you're going to buy VRBO just to buy VRBO, it's a lot of work or it's a lot of money.
Right.
Right. And it's kind of like, take your pick on what it is. And where I see people doing the best in the VRBOs are the ones that really work the VRBO. Like it is a themed VRBO. It has all kinds of different things that go with it. They're using it for retreats. It's not just a VRBO. It was very, very specifically set up.
Specifically set up and strategically marketed and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Like there's more business pieces that go to it than just like a classic rental property.
Yeah. So if you look at previous mastermind members, Sina and Keisha, they did their first VRBO. They were students of mine as well, and I coached them through some stuff. And they did their first VRBO in Denver, and it's called Peach House. It was specifically designed for bachelorette and women's retreats and women's getaways. 100%.
That's so smart. That's so smart.
But Keisha's podcast is geared. Like I think she just surpassed 8 million downloads on her podcast called Empower Her. Her podcast is female dominant, which is drawing crowds to the VRB. So do you see where she used this to do this?
Well, and
right?
we've actually talked quite a bit about that as far as like the Pasternacks is kind of more our lifestyle brand that we're growing and scaling. And like we've always talked about potentially having real estate as a piece of that puzzle.
Mhm.
So I think that's like a really good way to think about it, is kind of how that VRBO or Airbnb might fit your market instead of just like anything that's out there, but like what is your audience actually asking for in a rental property like that?
Yeah. Well, this is also where we get into, because you guys might be on similar path that Wendy and I are in, is you get into this dream of where we're at and where we want to go. And part of that is looking at like, hey, if what we're going to do is the Pasternacks and like talking about your avatar that we talked about at Mastermind, is this second home you're buying, are you going to upsize it in order to use it for retreats? Are we going to dream bigger than what is actually here and go, yes, we're going to do retreats here, or yes, we're going to rent this out for mastermind retreats or VRBO or whatever that looks like, so that it fits into not only what you're doing now, but what you're doing in the future.
And that's so funny that you said that. I just got goosebumps because like that's something we always have talked about. I mean, like probably since day one of getting married, is like hosting retreats in some way or capacity. So I guess kind of like follow up to that. So like kind of bringing it down to like, okay, starter baby steps. I'm like, yes, let's go buy the retreat house in the mountain. Then I'm like, okay, wait, we need to figure out what's kind of like, okay, we got the line of credit. What's your first recommendation? Is it like, okay, let's go the second home route or retreat center route? Or is it more like, let's get some of these. I love the like Cracker Jack box, like non-sexy, just like making money in the background type rentals. Like, if we're talking about overall wealth legacy building for our family, what's kind of the best starting point? Is it dream big and go big, or is it like start with these little ones first and kind of build up your portfolio?
Yeah, so that's really great, and this is what I do for a lot of people is kind of getting into a private strategy and talking about the dream and then working it backwards because while the second home is great, is it one of those things like, hey, maybe right now, in 5 years we'd like to have a big enough place to do this. So
Mm-hmm.
let's buy something small that will work for us and the kids and as a VRBO to test it out. How much are we going to use it? What is it going to look like? What's it going to feel like for a VRBO? And be ready to capture that opportunity. So, here's the dreaming part. You're like, okay, I always bring up Munns Park because that's where we go. If you love Munns Park so much and you don't own anything up there, then go rent a small VRBO up there and see if you like it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do we love this? Do the kids love it? Is it something that we can do? The cool thing about VRBO is you can go experience any second home community you want on a
Yep.
weekend for pretty inexpensive, right? It's
Yeah.
inexpensive testing. And so you do that and then you figure out like, hey, this would work. We would use this. And you start to think about your schedule, right? So you guys have 4 kids, which usually involves sports, and you guys going in 12 directions and there's only 2 of you. That's why we only had 2 kids because it only takes 2 of us to manage them. Right?
Yeah, we had to hire a whole nother property manager for our kids.
Right. But it is something to think about because, one of our friends and partners, when their kids were little, they were up there all the time. When their kids got bigger, they were involved in sports. So they weren't being able to get up there every weekend.
Right.
So it is some things to think about as to at what stage do we want to do this?
Right.
And
Like
are we
when
better
does
off
that
just
actually make
Yep.
sense?
Right. So when you're dealing with kids and family, those are some of the things that we talk about in that bigger dream of when is it? Because for right now, the kids are scattered all over the place. Maybe we just rent something when we like to and test it out. And it's still on our dream board. This is what we want in 5 years because the kids will be at a different stage and we can do
Right.
that. But right now, let's kind of go through where should we start? Well, let's start with your kids, right? One of your questions, what was it about the kid thing?
We've talked about, I think, yeah, this is it. We've talked about owning a property for each of our kids. So we've got 4
Okay.
kids and, owning some sort of investment property for each of our kids so that, when they hit 18, they could use that for school. They could use that to start their own business. They can keep
Okay.
running it and use it as an investment for their future. There's obviously a lot of different things we could do for it, but we've talked a lot about kind of that idea of like a property for each kid.
Okay. I love that. Can I give you a suggestion since I have
Yes,
the 20-year-old kids? Okay.
please.
I wouldn't put names on anything.
Mm-hmm.
And here is why. In my opinion, this is the way Wendy and I have structured it. The rental portfolio is meant to produce cash flowing income into the trust beyond when we're living.
Mm-hmm.
The boys are being trained in that as well. You could give them a one-time payout at 18 or 20 of, let's say, $100,000 in equity. If that was kept as a rental, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of passive income in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you guys are building your portfolio, which is part of your legacy. Building the portfolio for the kids, which by the way, this is where it's gonna come together. We are having the conversation with our 20-year-old now, which we just found a house the other day, which would be perfect for them. It's down the street. They're not ready for it. Now, am I going to earmark that one because they're closer now? You guys could live somewhere different right now, right? In 10 years, right? So it's going to
Mhm.
Yeah.
change. So it's not so much naming it for the kids as it is your legacy. Then when the kids get to that point, you're like, okay, this is how we are going to partner on your first investment property, right? And then you're going to buy that first house with that child because they're going to have the low down payment. You can be a co-signer on it. There's a number of different ways to do it. And now you're helping them understand the process of the investing rather than just giving them something. Now, here's the other part of it. Here's what I do like about it. Let's say you have 4 kids, and you're like, we want to, all 4 of them are going to go to college. Okay. Now this is a different naming. Hey, we want to have 4 rental properties that are, your kids are 8 and younger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
8 and
eight's-
younger.
Yep.
8 down to 2.
8 and younger. Okay, 8 down to 2. So the 8-1, we've got some time to make up, right? Because they're already 8. 2-year-old, not so much. You almost be, 2/3 of the way paid off mortgage with 2-year-old. So now you look at, hey, they're going to go to college. I'm going to buy a house as a college fund, not for them, but in 10 or 15 years when they're ready to go, if they go, then we can do a cash out refinance. We can do an equity line and we can pull equity from that to pay cash for school. And then the tenant will continue to pay that off. If they don't go to school, you don't have to do anything with it and you're not being penalized for it.
Yeah.
Right? If you invest in a 529B plan, it is specific for education.
Yep.
And it's your money you have to save. If they're going to spend $150,000 at college, compounding interest, you have to save X amount per month. Well, if I do the same thing in real estate and somebody's paying down that balance, I can go pull money out of that house tax-free to pay for college and allow the tenant to keep paying down that house and going through that process.
Go ahead.
So I think kind of might not last question, but most important question is really around metrics of what should we look for?
Yeah, what should we look for?
Let's say we have $150,000 to put down.
Okay.
What should we look for in a house to make sure that, we invest into this? It's going to be a long-term investment. What are the metrics that we need to know?
So you start thinking about, is where I live or close to where I live somewhere where we can invest? Does it make sense? So the simple numbers of what is something rent for versus what is something cost. Then you start looking okay, maybe this doesn't work. Where else can I look to see? Because here's where the education comes in. I hear all kinds of people, oh yeah, you could go buy a $30,000 house in Detroit and it's going to be great. And you're like, well, if you can collect the rent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And they're like, but then, I had a friend invest in Alabama 4 years ago. They bought a bunch of $100,000 homes when the houses were $200,000 in Arizona. Arizona doubled in value. Alabama might have seen 10% appreciation, and it was a huge problem during COVID. So it's thinking about it's a more expensive property. It's not cash flowing as well, but does it make more sense for our future long-term? Now, if you've got 30 grand cash sitting around, you're like, I want to go buy a Cracker Jack box in Detroit and it's going to make me $500 a month and I own the house and I'm willing to deal with whatever that looks like. Great. It just depends on what you're comfortable with and what you want hands off with and how you want to make those investments. Right. So some of that is determined by where you're at in life and what you're comfortable with and what the numbers play out to be. So I'm just going to give you a scenario. If you're like, hey, we've got $100,000 to put down on a rental property. What is the best thing we should do?
Yeah.
Right? Well, I'm always going to look at Phoenix and go, well, let me show you what you can do here. And here are the numbers and here are all the pieces that are here. That is an option. And, there's a couple of other states that I might know of that might make sense that I can refer you to someone to also look at those. And you might, explore. Maybe you guys lived somewhere else that you liked. Or, Phoenix isn't the only place to invest, but it's finding places where you have some potential growth. You're probably not looking at blue states because they're not landlord friendly. If you look at all the crap that's happened on the West Coast, during COVID, you want to be careful, right? How are the landlord laws in those states, right? Is it going to be a problem? And do I end up paying for somebody's rent for 3 years? Right? Because they certainly didn't care about the investors and the money that they had to pay out, but the tenants got free rides on stuff. Well, we didn't have a lot of that here, right? So it's kind of looking at what are those potentials. And then you just hone in on a price range and go, this fits what we want to do. We want to buy one of these a year, but you're also being educated to where, hey, we had a friend invest down in Florida and we kind of like the numbers down there. We're going to buy another one down there. But what you're doing is you're learning to question what you're doing and how you're doing it. That's where the mechanics come in.
Yep.
Right. Do you think, is there value, obviously the numbers, and that's the most important as far as breaking down where you should invest. But once again, we have 4 kids. Our time is very limited. Is there something to looking close to home first? Or because we're looking at property managers and things like that, it doesn't necessarily matter distance from us?
It's not going to matter distance from you because you're not going to be maintaining it. It's finding the boots on the ground that you trust
Okay.
to help you make those decisions, right?
Yep.
So it's like, hey, we're going to invest in Phoenix because Steve's there and we can find something that is a good deal and he knows what the rental market is. We have the contracting piece. That's great, right? Because you start to see like, here's all the pieces I need to understand, right? So this might be a good place to practice and
Yep.
get your feet wet and then go, okay, now we understand it and this is what it should look like. Now we know
How
what
can
it's
we
going to,
model that
right,
other
somewhere
places?
else.
Yep.
Yep.
So the real thing you're saying here is hire Steve in Phoenix because he's going to help you figure out this whole real estate portfolio. I mean, like,
No, but seriously, I think like
truly.
with 4 kids, it's like what we've learned as an entrepreneur is
finding the right
finding the
people.
right people in the right seats who are passionate about your business. We're going through this right now and
Yep.
with many different vendors and
Sure.
employees and contractors. Like it is about finding the right people who you can not just trust, but you know they are just as passionate about your success as you are.
Mhm.
And that's where in the real estate investing side is who do I trust and where do I trust them at and can they get me all the way through the process? Because the last thing you want is, yeah, we invested in Florida and now I can't get the property manager to call me back. I've got to find these things, right? You feel like in limbo and you're so
Right.
far away, there's not a lot you can do. And so, here, it's really easy for me to take you through the process. I mean, it's like, hey, this is what you're qualified for. I will go find that for you and deliver it with a bow, right?
Yeah.
Tenant in place, all the things. And then you start realizing like, well, do I really want to invest somewhere else, even though it's cheaper? Or do I want to stay somewhere where I feel secure in what I'm investing in?
Absolutely. Like you said, just to like reiterate that, like it's just so important to have the right people who understand the goals and align value wise and like what you said, just
Yeah.
are aligned in wanting the same successes that you want. Because at the end of the day, like we're not professionals in this. This isn't our area of expertise.
Right.
So like we need to find the right people who are going to help make all these things possible and tie them up with a pretty little bow.
And like, I know we've had a couple conversations with you and Nicole's had a few more. But it's like even just in this hour, it's like literally the last 10 years of our marriage.
Everything that we've talked about.
We've talked about real estate. It's always been on our mind. And every time that we make a little bit of extra money and we're stashing it away in savings or in our, investment accounts, it's like, well, wait, should we think about real estate? Right. But like we've never had a really clear, either a clear picture, clear vision, or a clear partner who we're like, oh, okay, cool. This makes sense. Whereas like just in the last hour, it's like, oh, you mean we can talk to you obviously offline of this podcast and tell you, hey, here's how much money we have.
Yep.
And, I understand it's not as easy as like, oh yeah, you'll literally just tie a bow and give it to us. But like having somebody who's been doing this for years
Yep.
and is like, here are the practical steps, is like, it's just so relieving
I was
and
just
like
gonna say, it's such a
motivating. And we're
relief.
like,
We're
when do you
gonna
want to
get on
sign
the-
up? Like,
I know. I was
Yeah.
gonna say like, I don't know if you can
we've been
catch
so ready for
the sly
least 5 years, but-
side eyes of us being like everything that you're saying. We're like, oh, this is exactly the piece that we've
This
been
is
missing.
what we didn't have.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is the information we didn't have. This is the connection we didn't have. So thank you for taking the time to
Exactly.
like
Of
walk
course.
through these things with us because your knowledge is so vast. And I think the creative use of money and wealth management is like,
It's not taught.
it's
you
not
know?
taught, but it is so smart. Even just what you were saying about an education plan versus a property. Like
Yes.
if our kids don't go to college for whatever reason, I mean,
Oh, I talk to my financial advisor all the time. I'm like, hey, what are these exceptions to the rule? Is it like my kid wants to be a chef and I can go over to France for a couple months while they like go to culinary school? Is it like, it's like
but there's so many different
just don't
reasons
know.
that
Yeah.
our kids might not go to college.
and then there's 10%. Say
is
we grow it to
gone.
500,000, we take it out. Great. Now we got 450.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's
And tax
the
upon
nice,
that too. Like
right. Well, and there's no tax, when you pull equity out of a property, which, and again, if you're negotiating with school, can you negotiate better by paying with cash, right? From that. And guess what? It's kind of sounds lame. Like because somebody will tell you, well, you're going to go pull cash out and finance their education for the next 30 years. Yeah, but somebody else is going to pay for it too.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
That's the difference, right?
Yeah, no, just like the way that you've kind of reframed the perspective on wealth building and legacy, like it's just genius. So truly, thank you for
Oh,
taking the time to walk through some of this stuff. I know, like we'll probably be texting you right after this call, like, okay, when do we sign up? What
Yeah,
do we
well,
need to
I
do?
mean, we'll go through the strategy session, right? It's 4 weeks. We go through it, we dive deep into it, and then at the end, we've got something that's built out that says this is what we're doing, and also, hey, if we make more money doing the things, we can also speed this up if we want to.
Yeah.
And what is really, really important to anybody listening to this, like when we go through these things, my biggest piece that I add value in is getting you in the mindset of being prepared around real estate. And there's an investment mindset of, Nicole, if you're out getting your hair done and your hairdresser is like, oh my God, my mom just passed away. She left me with this house that is just falling down. You'd be like, I'm buying.
I'm in.
What do you got? Right? But most people, here's their response. Oh, I got a realtor for you. That doesn't solve her problem. But if you're like, I'm an investor, I would like to buy that, right? That's the conversation that ends up happening. And that's where, investments are made and wealth is created and problems are solved by going, hey, I really want this and there's a way to do it. So it's say yes and figure it out later, right? Like, okay, tell me more about the house. What's wrong with it? What's your pain point? What do you need? Do you need money? You start understanding those questions and then you're like, oh man, these people are talking about houses again. What do they got? Right?
You start seeing all the opportunities that are
You
there
do.
that are
Yes.
literally there every day. And without kind of this framework and mindset around it, you just don't know it. But they really are so prevalent. And I think we've always seen that potential. We
You
just
just didn't
haven't
know
had
how.
the practical
Mhm.
steps of, okay,
Right.
that sounds like a great idea, but what am I going to do with this dilapidated house? And
Yes.
so I
Right.
think that's just this clarity piece that you add of not only do you have kind of the big picture vision, but you also have all the little building blocks to help people get there.
Yeah, there are definitely some tips and tricks we have learned over time building what we've built and helping other people build what they build, right? So
Yeah.
it's all those pieces that we combine and put that together. Well, are you guys full? Are you brain dead?
I
Feel
think
good?
we're literally so excited to go out and start investing in
yeah,
real
I
estate.
think-
Like tomorrow, we're like, forget everything else we've been talking about all week. Like, call Steve. This is our next move.
So here's what I encourage you to do, and anybody listening, this is what I encourage you to do. No matter where you're at in life, I don't care how many kids, whatever it is like sit down and dream together and say, hey, if we could have at whatever age it is, $20,000, $30,000, $5,000 in passive income, that's the goal. Then we at least have something to shoot for. And now we start to reverse engineer it. Like, is it one house? Is it two houses? Is it 4 houses? Some people think it's more than it is, but it's not. And you're like, great, I need 3 houses to create $7,500 a month in passive income in 20 years, right? It's like, I love having this conversation with a first-time home buyer and saying, okay, you're 20. Do you want to have $75,000 a month in income by the time you're 50? Well, yeah, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I need you to move 3 times in the next 3 years. That's all I need you to do.
That's it.
I just need you to live out of boxes like a homeless person for the next 3 years and not sell any of these and not pull any money out. And you will have this amount of passive income by the time you're 50.
Yeah.
It sounds easy, right?
Well, no,
Well,
but
sure, but like
I-
time is. Yeah.
well, and I just love the way you frame it in the big picture. And that, like, we talk about this so much too, with just this concept of like, really the goal at the end of the day is to be creating a life you love, right? Like to be
Yes.
actually enjoying your life day to day. And I think it's so easy to get caught in the day to day and the grind of it all that you forget to dream and like see these big picture things. And this is what we talk about all the time too. Like, what do you want your life to look like in 20 years? Like, is it 75 a month in passive income? Is it a house on the mountains overlooking the ocean? Is it like actually dream about what those things look like? Because
Yeah.
then all the pieces are going to fit into place to make those things happen. I mean, truly, even this conversation, to get all woo, it's like, it's so, I don't,
Serendipitous.
yeah,
Yeah.
serendipitous, because it's like we truly have been talking about things like this for so long, and actually finding that piece of finding somebody who can help guide us through that process is,
Yep.
But like, and like, here's a practical example. We've been talking about this for 10 years,
mhm.
right? Like,
That's
what
10 years
what
we've
if we would
wasted.
have done this 2 years into our marriage, right?
So
And
so let's just talk about that for a second, because I think it's really important. So 10 years ago, you guys had gotten married. You probably bought your first house. But ever since then, do you guys look back at the houses that you've owned and said, we should have kept that? Why didn't we? And you probably didn't. My guess is because nobody gave you that advice,
Mhm.
Exactly.
right? So that is where my goal comes in, is to show people, hey, there are multiple ways you can do this. Do you want to know all your options, and then choose the adventure that fits you best, not what fits me
Yeah.
best, right? I don't need to sell you anything. What I do need you to know is what exactly is possible, because you look back, like I talked to a guy today that's like, hey, you're on, he was just talking about his owning 2 houses. He bought another house and then he sold them for no reason. He's like, I don't even know why I did it. He's like, I just thought it was the right thing to do. So that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of like where we've been in the real estate place. Of like,
Absolutely.
we
Nobody's
just kind
told
of
us.
think this is the right thing to do, so we've done
Like,
it.
if
So,
anyone's out there, it's like our last home was $400,000,
mhm.
right?
Right,
We had
right.
a 2.75% interest rate, and we put a lot of money. It was like our payment was like $1,500 a month,
Yep.
and then we sold it for $525, I think, or $540. So sure, we made $140,000 on it. But if we would have kept that
And rented it.
and rented it, where interest rates are now,
Yep.
it would have been stupid.
It would have
But
been.
we didn't know that
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we didn't have that knowledge.
Right. So, it's just a strategy and a knowledge, and that's, really, I appreciate you guys coming on and sharing, where you're at in the journey. And I'm looking forward to helping you build that strategy for what's next.
Yeah, we're
We
excited
can't wait.
to talk to
Yeah.
you more.
I think that's the thing. It's just like that this conversation is making me want to encourage everybody that's listening to this is like, start thinking about it now.
Yeah.
We thought about it 10 years ago, and I'm not looking back regretting anything. Like,
No.
we've done it actually really well. We're really happy with our life, but man, we have 4 kids now, and if we would have thought about this
In the beginning.
in the beginning and searched out, mentors, advisors, people like yourself,
Yeah.
we're not in a bad place by any means, but we could have been in a
Sure.
better place,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah,
start thinking about it now.
Yeah. And now we just shift gears, right? Because
Yes.
you'll see, after this call, everything will be a different perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Every time you think
yeah.
about selling a house, you're like, wait, should we do this different? Right. And so
Yeah.
there's all kinds of strategies that work. And it just, again, we build the strategy that leads to what your dream life is, not somebody else's.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, not
Yeah,
only with
absolutely.
us, but obviously all the people who are listening. I think you have such a creative approach, and I'm so excited for the knowledge that you're sharing with people, because I think not only does this create wealth and legacy, but like, I think this has a lot of potential to create a lot of freedom in people's lives that
Mhm.
they don't know how to get to, whether you're investing in your first property or you're just trying to buy your first house. Like, the perspective that you're bringing to the table is so unique. So thank you for sharing it and being you and just putting it out there.
Well, thank you both for showing up and appearing, and we'll talk a little bit more offline.
Sounds
Sounds
good.
great.
Thanks, Steve.
Appreciate you guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Real Estate Revolution. I hope you'll join me in the revolution through stevedvalentine.com. This is where the podcast, the Limitless Circle, private mentoring, coaching, and all the real estate that we do. Plus, there's a few exciting courses in there as well that might interest you. Looking forward to connecting you soon. And I hope that you will share and subscribe this podcast if it had value to you.